of the Spokane Society, the AIA, and an associate professor at Eastern Washington University. So before I introduce our speaker in tonight's talks, I just have a couple housekeeping items. The first is a bit of sad news. I want to let everyone know that a longtime member of our society, Dr. Katherine Lawrenson, recently passed away. Dr. Lawrenson and her husband, Dr. Fred Lawrenson, have been longtime members and contributors to our society for many years, and she will be missed, and our thoughts are with Fred and her loved ones. If this is your first time joining us, and if you come every month, I see a lot of familiar faces, you'll know I have to do my little spiel here, so I'll do that real quick. Who is the AIA? What do we do? Well, the AIA, the Archaeology Institute of America, we have three things we do. We educate, we advocate, and we excavate. AIA is North America's largest and oldest archaeological organization with over 200,000 members worldwide. Our society, we are in our 76th year here in Spokane. We're one of the older societies here on the West Coast, but there are societies all across the country supporting archaeological work and all kinds of cultural heritage work that's vital across the world. Our own society, we tend to have a lot of different things that we're doing at any one time. The main thing, of course, we're doing is that we're bringing in great speakers every third Thursday to the MAC and online. We update our website, and we say it's me when I remember, so my apologies if it's a little bit behind. I'm going to get back to it. It's a busy term. But we update with who our speakers are and any kind of other events that we're doing. So please go check that out. We also still, a lot of our speakers graciously allowed us to record the lectures. So we have a YouTube page with past lectures. Our lecturer this evening has agreed to have this be recorded. So if you can't get enough, because it's going to be a great talk, you can go watch it again later. So you can go to that YouTube page. We also have a link on our webpage to our YouTube page. We are still on Facebook. So that does tend to tell us who the monthly speakers are. And if you ever need to be at home or looking at this from abroad, it always has the Zoom link as well to our monthly talks. Wanted to flag up, we have our newsletter for spring was just recently sent out. Hopefully folks received it to their email inboxes. If you would like to be on our newsletter, just let the fine folks up at the desk up front know. We'll get your email information. We'll send you our newsletter with news of our society. Upcoming talks. Next month, we have Dr. Samantha Flad from Washington State University talking about her research in the Pueblo Southwest. And in April, we have Dr. Eleanor Breen from Alexandria Archaeology. I wanted to put in Virginia. We're not having somebody fly in from Egypt, from Virginia. Eleanor was my former boss, so expect some good ribbing back and forth about that when I first started in archaeology. She's a great lecturer. I'm going to talk about some of the buried ships that were found in the harbor of Alexandria when they were recently doing work on the Potomac River. So that's some of our upcoming events. We potentially have a May speaker as well. That's a little bit up in the air. We will let you know if we get that confirmed. Okay, before I do anything else, we'd like to read our land acknowledgement, the museum's land acknowledgement. So we would like to honor the original people of the lands on which we stand by recognizing this as the traditional homeland territory of the Spokane tribe. Their presence here, since time immemorial, can be seen and felt within these museum walls and in the surrounding landscapes. With gratitude, we'd like to extend a thank you to the Spokanes, past, present, and future, for sharing this space as a place for artistic and cultural expressions to be enjoyed by all. So the following is a live presentation, and viewer recording is strictly prohibited. The AIA respects the intellectual property of its presenters and asks that viewers do the same. Thank you very much for your cooperation. And I didn't copy over the slide introducing tonight's speaker, so I will be doing this from memory. I will be introducing Dr. Katherine Huntley, Associate Professor at Boise State University, and the Director of the Libarna Project, which we'll be talking about tonight. Dr. Huntley obtained her bachelor's degree from North Carolina State, UNC, Chapel Hill. I am so bad. Don't have that. But I know she got her master's and her PhD from Leicester University. And because I did my PhD abroad, I probably pronounced that correctly. Woohoo, all right. So Dr. Huntley's work focuses on Roman this is where I needed my notes, all kinds of Roman colonial, gender, women, children. Okay, and she'll be talking about her project that she is the director on the Libarna project. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Huntley for this evening's talk.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Yes, tonight I am here to talk about my project in northern Italy, a region we call Cisalpine Gaul, and I'll talk a little bit about why we call that part of Italy Gaul, because normally when we think of Gaul in the Roman world, we think of France across the Alps. So I spent a lot of my career actually working down in the south of Italy, particularly at Pompeii for a lot of years. I was helping to finish up and do the post-excavation work for a major project that had gotten way backlogged, and it was kind of a mess. And one day the superintendency of Pompeii came and took all of their finds out of their storage room and moved it into a central store. And fortunately that same day I was horrified and like, how are we gonna, do this without the superintendency's support? One of my colleagues from up north said, I've got a really interesting Roman city up here. Would you be interested in coming up and doing some research up there? And I was like, thank goodness. Pompeii is an amazing place to visit. Some of the goings on of the research in the background can be quite crazy, as you can probably imagine with a major site like that. And as you'll see, Libarna is really cool and it's a really exciting place, and it has a ton of potential to give us some really cool insight into a less well-studied area of Italy. So I wish people down in Pompeii all the best, but I am happy to be working up north now, and it's a lovely place, and I work with some wonderful people, both within the superintendency of the region of Piedmonte, and then also I wanted to include some of my team members up here, because they've put in so much work, and I could not be speaking here about all the things I'm going to without their wonderful help and contributions. And they dedicate their time and all their labor, and I try to keep them happy, and I think they are. They do keep coming back. So yes, so I'm going to start off talking a little bit about Cisalpine Gaul in the region of Liguria, where we work. And then I'll talk a little bit about the start of the project, where we were doing geophysical survey and aerial photography in order to elaborate the plan of the ancient city. And then I'll talk about our excavations, which began 2 years ago. So we had a big gap between COVID. So I started actually working back at Libarna in 2016, and we did survey until 2018, and a little bit of archival work in 2019, and then and then finally in 2023 we were able to get things working again, and we've had 2 really great seasons, and we're planning on going back this summer. So this is the region of Cisalpine Gaul. It's this north part of Italy, so quite a little bit of ways north of Italy, but you can see kind of areas like I work quite near Genoa in an area called Liguria. But it's an area that has its own unique history of cultural change, migration, social interaction, and integration. And it was a region marked by diversity and a lack of real kind of political unity and some interesting cultural developments. We see a process of various peoples pushing and migrating into northern Italy, most notably the Etruscans and the Gauls, and of course, eventually the Romans, which again will be kind of my major concern with the site of Libarna. During the Bronze Age, we had these 2 kind of main cultures, the Terra Mare and the Po Plain, and the Polata around the Lakes district. And we get at a certain point of the Bronze Age a clear increase in the number of settlements and the population rising. So let me just see if I've got some notes here. But once we get into the Bronze Age, there's again, kind of, we start to see clear movements of other cultures, the Etruscans moving in, The kind of Latin sources really suggest a kind of a Etruscan domination, in fact, of Western northern Italy, which is perhaps a little bit of an overestimation. And then we get something called the Gallic invasion happening during the Iron Age. Again, the word invasion is quite sensational. So there was clearly people moving in from across the Alps, raiding. We see an increase in hilltop settlements, things like that. But the kind of distribution of Gallic material culture in the kind of time after that is kind of variable depending on what region in northern Italy you are in Cisalpine Gaul. But we get this, we get a number of Gallic tribes that move in and become big players in the upcoming movement of Rome as it expands onto the Mediterranean stage. And then the area in particular that I work is called Liguria. And it has its own interesting group of people known as, to the Romans as the Ligures. Now they were, again, kind of, they get called Celto-Ligurians because there are some similarities, but they are a distinct culture that was defined as early as the Bronze Age, the 13th century in that region of Italy. And they were divided into a number of what were probably relatively small tribes focused around kind of individual settlements in the hinterland around them. And the region seems to have been less impacted by this so-called Gallic invasion. We don't see as much of the Latin material culture coming in as we do see in other parts of northern Italy. It was also a place that was marked by, again, kind of not kind of political unity. And we see that during the Second Punic War, there's a lot of differing opinions on which side to choose when Rome goes up against Hannibal. And at that point, Rome had gone in and conquered the region, but then there was, again, kind of groups that joined on Hannibal's side and groups that stayed on Rome's side. And so Rome needed to go back in and ultimately kind of reconquer some of the peoples. So, it was finally incorporated by the first emperor, Augustus, into one of the regions of Italia. Augustus divided it into 13 different provinces, and roughly the area that was inhabited by the Ligures became the region of Liguria. What makes things complicated in terms of just talking about it is that the site I'm going to talk about today was part of ancient Liguria. It was part of the region that was inhabited by the Ligures before it was founded as a Roman colony. But today it's located in modern day Piedmonte, in the region of Piedmonte. So I'm going to refer to it as a Ligurian city because of its ancient associations, but just for sometimes if I refer to it as refer to Piedmonte, it's because it's within the modern region of Piedmonte and under the control of the superintendency of Piedmonte. So this is my beautiful site of This is the beautiful site of Libarna. So I have been working there again for almost a decade now, and you can see what some very kind of typical things of a Roman city, the orthogonal planning with the square city blocks. We've got a beautiful amphitheater there. And then, yay, that works. To the north, there's a Roman style theater. And so that comprises what is now the archaeological park. They've also found a bath complex here, and I'll show a better map. But one thing you'll notice very clearly on this image is the presence of 2 railway lines and a modern road that nicely bisect this beautiful archaeological site. So that means that a lot of what we know about Libarna has not been discovered or has mostly been done through very fragmentary research as part of the modern development of the area. And there hasn't been a whole lot of research-driven work done. There was some excavations, notably these two city blocks in the 1970s, but otherwise everything's basically been done in association with that modern development. But the site was discovered, or rediscovered rather, back in the late 18th century by a guy named Antonio Bottazzi, who kind of first recorded the various elements that were still visible, which pretty much was the amphitheater and the theater. And then through the early parts of the 19th century, you did get some of these major public monuments being excavated. And then kind of a big lag period where there wasn't a lot going on. And then again, kind of when they were putting in these railway lines, they did then some archaeological work. And then finally, again, in the 70s, we get the work on the two insula blocks. So Libarna is usually associated with the founding of a consular road known as the Via Postumia. And that's where we get the date for its foundation in 148 BC. We don't really know that that was for sure the date it was opened, but there's kind of a tradition that those two things correlate. But it's an interesting site that really has the potential to tell us a great deal about the early expansion of the Roman Empire into the non-Italic regions and how Rome used colonial cities to control the provinces in the early days of its empire. Because this is a really early foundation, even for the region. The regional capital of Dertona wouldn't be founded for another almost 30 years. And so Libarna probably, for those 30 years, was probably the most major city in the region after Genoa, which was on the coast, a major emporium on the coast. So here you can see in that little circle is where Libarna is, and the yellow line is the Via Postumia. So right along a major trade route that connects Genoa on the west coast to the Aquileia all the way on the east and along the Adriatic. So this plays a huge role in the success of Libarna and the fact that it was such an important site. And you can see that strategic placement if you consider the fact that the modern highway and the two railway lines flow through it in the same way the Via Postumia did. We can see the modern development following along those ancient pathways. So here's another kind of bit of evidence of Libarna's significance. This is the Peninsular tablet, which is a medieval copy of what was a 4th century map. And it shows the road networks across the empire. And this is the region that shows Liguria. So, and there is Libarna. So a notable stop. It's sort of like an ancient Roman road map, right? It straightens everything out, shows you all the major places you can go and stop and, you know, have a drink along your travels, because the Romans loved traveling around their empire. And so there's Libarna. It's not a frequent mention in the historical sources. We do have it does get named on occasion as being an important city, but we don't have a huge number of historical sources directly about the city. So yes. Oops. So this is sort of the goals of the project. We're trying to understand Libarna's urban plan and how it developed, and thinking about improving the knowledge of how urbanization progressed in this particular region of Italy. It's quite an understudied region in respect to Italy. A lot of studies of things like Romanization and the spread of Roman urbanism and the development of the colonial landscape focuses predominantly on peninsular Italy, and the North has kind of been left out of that dialogue, that narrative. And then we hope to understand the survival of indigenous cultural elements and how they impacted the acculturation that the Roman control brought to the region of Liguria. So For certain reasons, I'm not going to actually talk much more about the Ligures, and that has to do with what we've found so far. But we are just kind of a nascent project as far as the excavations go. But we've found some interesting things so far that really attest to some important things that Libarna can teach us, and some important things that we don't know yet or understand yet about the city. So again, it was founded during a really early critical period in Rome's imperial expansion. It marked some of the earliest expansion into a region inhabited by these non-Italic peoples. And, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But yes, and one of the things we want to focus on in particular, which has been very much neglected, is non-public architecture. One of the things that has been well studied at a number of Roman sites across the peninsula and across the north of Italy has been its public architecture. Things like the amphitheater, the theater, forums, basilica, these various different important public structures. But Libarna, we're trying to focus on the domestic and the maybe the smaller scale things, shops, restaurants, the things you read about coming out of Pompeii. We're hoping to find some evidence of that at Libarna. And that's another thing that, again, why the region is important to study, because a lot of our understanding of Roman cities comes from places like Pompeii and Cosa, basically central and southern Italy. And what we know and understand from studying the Roman world is that there's a lot of differences based on regions. And so we want to learn what made Cisalpine Gaul unique, and particularly Western Cisalpine Gaul, this region of Liguria. How did Rome deal with this particular region? How did the people living there take Roman culture and fuse it with their own? So Libarna, again, represents this important settlement in the region, but due to modern development, the data gained from excavations has been really fragmentary. So here's kind of what we knew about Libarna when we started working back in 2016. So you can see quite clearly, right, the amphitheater and these two city blocks that were excavated in the 70s, and the theater is up there. And then you notice the bits under the railway line, and then bits of the forum. And this here is the Via Postumia, which you can see nicely parallels that modern highway, and little bits of the forum that was excavated in the early part of the 20th century, but all very fragmentary. And so we went out there to do some geophysical survey and some aerial photography, and because Italy is always kind of diced up into these tiny fields, it was a lot of work kind of getting permission from various landowners, and what happened there? So these are the kind of areas I want to talk about with regards to the geophysical survey and aerial photography in red. And then this letter M is actually where we've been excavating, but we'll get to that in a minute. So this is Dronita. You can see her up there. Isn't she lovely? Sorry, I don't know why the slideshows is doing that. But she helped us really elaborate on Libarna's plan. And one thing that really helped us and helped Dronita out was the drought conditions, particularly in 2017. Along with the widespread cultivation of alfalfa, which is a major crop in the area. And so it was the differences revealed in the growth rate of the alfalfa plants in particular that gave us insight into and evidence of the layout of Libarna, and really helped us to expand it. So you can see here, this is 2017, just how extreme the drought was, because those brown parts are where the alfalfa went and hit hard things. Like here, we've probably got a bit of a road. We've probably got paved floors there. And then the walls of these various structures. And where it didn't hit, obviously the crop could continue to grow and thrive. But alfalfa, one of the things that's particularly useful about alfalfa is that it's harvested 4 times a year, about 4 times a year. And the drought hit just when the new crop was coming in. So that's what really made the marks so spectacular. So, and you can see just kind of from the data, you know, this is 2017, significantly lower amounts of rain in June and July, and much fewer days, even in May. Even though they got 25 millimeters of rain, it happened in fewer days, and so it didn't absorb into the ground as well. So this is the image of the Via Postumia, which you can see, none of that is visible above ground. And you can even see the individual paving stones. That's how impressive the crops marks were due to this drought. And so you can see what, you know, on either side as well, buildings, their internal divisions, possible, you know, floors. It was just incredible drought conditions, and the drone loved them. So here is the forum, Libarna's forum, where we identified the basilica, which were basically the law courts in an ancient Roman city. The forum being, of course, the kind of civic, religious, commercial center of the city itself. That's why the Via Postumia ran right through it. And then we've got what are 2 temples here. So this is a typical kind of footprint of a Roman style temple. This one looks a little weird. It doesn't look like our typical Roman style temple. It looks much more like temples that we find across the Alps, which are oftentimes called Gallo or Celtic Romano-Celtic temples. So this is not one from Northern Italy. This is actually one from Britain, but they looked very, very different from your typical Roman temples. And so that itself is quite interesting in terms of thinking about holding on to certain indigenous traditions, is the presence of these 2 very different types of temples in the city center. And one of the things that has been very important in Ligurian culture, as we know, was waterways. They often built their settlements near rivers, and that kind of religion that dealt with waterways was also really important. And so this was a column that was found in the theater area at Libarna. And I mention this because a brilliant archaeologist we work with, Melania Cazzullo, thinks very much that this is kind of reflective of maybe an important association with water and with the sea, which is interesting because we are very far from the sea at Libarna, and I know that because we don't get to go to the beach much. So it looks, again, kind of it's very interesting image of a deity flanked by dolphins. Could be something like Oceanus, but she's very convinced that it could be kind of a link with an earlier Ligurian tradition associated with water deities, or the divinity of water. So yeah, so Dronita, all that red stuff we were able to add just with aerial photography. I shouldn't say just with aerial photography. We had our drone expert, Michael Boyles, did an incredible job and put a lot of work into it. But we were able to elaborate on the forum and along the Via Postumia. We also found this really interesting building. We're not sure what it is. We'd really love to excavate it, but it's in a farmer's field. And some of them are not always happy when archaeologists come and say, hey, we want to dig in your field. They were a little bit hesitant sometimes about us doing survey. In fact, one farmer whose land was down here, he gave us permission. Very nice gentleman, but he kept telling us, there's no walls in my field. There's no walls. No walls. You're not going to find anything. And fair enough, he, you know, again, kind of, it can be tricky politically to have Roman ruins that archaeologists, or that particularly the state, is interested in Italy. So, but lots of interesting stuff we've been able to add with Dronita's success. We tried some other survey techniques, not always as successful. So we did magnetometry, but the site having so much development around it, there was just a ton of metal pollution that got in the way of the meter's readings. So that was pretty much worthless. We did not get any data from that. And then we did electrical resistivity survey, which was problematic in drought conditions because you need water. So it involves putting a probe at one end and the meter in another and transferring electricity between the two, which doesn't go well if there's no water in the soil. So that sadly was not successful. Our GPR though, we got the GPR in 2017 and 2018, and we had spectacular results in fields where we were able to work. So one of the things we were able to do as well is to confirm some of the 19th century excavations that were not so well documented. We had things like drawings. So this is from a 19th century clergyman named John Francesco Capurro, who's incredible. He put together basically the museum in which the column capital came from. He also did excavations of the bathhouse. And so now we were able to see how well he documented in his drawings the archaeological remains that are now covered over. So the bathhouse is not part of it's part of the archaeological park, but it's all covered over. You can't see it. So that was really interesting. I got to tell a story about Capurro. He was a fantastically interesting guy. He put together the first museum for the people of the region. He was very much a forward thinker. At that point, a lot of archaeological collections were people's personal collections. And a lot of the remnants from Libarna came from these farmers' fields, right? They'd go and they'd find antiquities and things like that in their fields, and they'd keep them in their house. So he wanted to create a museum for everybody. So he would go to the farmers and he would say, will you donate your antiquities to my museum? They said no. He's okay. He came back with money and he offered them money. If they still refused, he supposedly came back with a shotgun. That's the local legend anyway. So he was quite a guy. He was, again, a real forward thinker, a man ahead of his times, and he was kind of a badass. So I suppose it would be different from the perspective of the farmers who maybe didn't want to give up their bits of Libarna. But for us, he's a local legend. So, but he did some really, again, exemplary work on the excavations for the 19th century. So we also, some of the fields, again, where we didn't get very good results from Dronita, we were able to see a lot with our GPR. So again, you can see here two intersecting roads and parts of these city blocks. And up here's the city blocks of the archaeological park. And here's the road. And so you can see the road matches up really nicely with our GPR results. Nice little epsital building here. Really would like to excavate that. Maybe a bathhouse, maybe another bathhouse of Libarna. But we don't know at this point what that is. But interesting stuff. Again, kind of this bit, probably a nice pavement. I hope that would be nice. One of my excavators is desperate to find a mosaic. I said absolutely not, because it would cost a fortune to have it lifted and put in a museum, which the superintendency might want to do. And that's on us to pay for. So I said no mosaic. No mosaic. Nobody's allowed to find a mosaic. No, it would be really cool. It would be really cool. But yes. So yeah, so here's overall all the bits we were able to get through our various geophysical survey, really GPR and aerial photography. So lots of interesting materials. So, and just one thing I forgot to mention, one interesting thing about Libarna is it had 2 monumental gates and no walls. So they haven't found any walls yet, but they really want to find walls. But we, again, kind of didn't see any evidence of that in any of our work. So So on to the excavations. So we've done 2 years now of excavations in this area, which we labeled Field M in our during our survey. So hence the names of the different trenches: M1, M2, M3, and M4. So M1 and M2 were our first 2 trenches, and then M3 and M4 were the trenches from our second year. So you can see here, Richard Chadwick, one of my trench supervisors, kind of did a map extending kind of the grid system to see, because one of the things we wanted to confirm was the grid system in this particular area of the city. So we weren't actually able to get any GPR results or aerial photography results for this particular field. The GPR didn't work because they wouldn't come in and cut the field, and then the soil at that point was too rocky and too uneven for the machine to be able to make contact with the ground like it needed to. And then it was just all wild bush and stuff like that. So there was nothing that Dronita could see. So the other reason we picked this field, I mean, the reason we picked this field is because our controller at the superintendency really liked this field. So they had actually done some excavations a couple years before we started for a gas pipeline. So again, part of the modern development. And he was interested in seeing what more was there. So it's our first couple years excavating. You want to keep your controller happy. And it was a place we didn't know much about. So we were happy to kind of move in there and see. So this is sort of where we put the trenches in. Again, M1 down here, we were hoping to catch a road. More on that. M2 was our second one, again, trying to catch a bit of the road. And then in 2004, we expanded on M2 because we found some interesting stuff. And we put in a kind of little slanted trench there. We were hoping to pick up this long road along the railway line, but we think it's just too close. And I don't think we were ever going to get it, but you know, you live on hope. So, yeah. So I'm going to start with M2. Okay, so just to be a little confusing, I'm not going to go in order of M1, M2, M3, and M4. I'm going to talk about M2 and M3 first, and then I'll get to M1 and M4. So this is M2, and I'd like you all just to marvel at what a beautiful trench it is, right? You've got the kind of different features in the trench that just align beautifully with the limits of excavation, right? And so we've got three things here. We've got a bit of the Roman road. Yay, we caught it. Again, kind of helping us to elaborate and confirm that, that grid system that gets overlaid the city. We've got the sidewalk here. These are the curbstones. And then we've got the building frontage and the internal part of the building. So, and you can see we dug a lot of different things, a lot of different kind of pits within it. We only had 4 weeks, and you know, it's never enough time. So we dug some of these sondages in it. But it's interesting. We had interesting finds coming out of this trench. So one thing is, most of what was going on was happening in the 1st to 2nd century, which aligns with a lot of what we know about what was going on, not just at Libarna, but in the region at the time, that a lot of money and resources were being put into urbanizing many of these cities, into building new parts to them and new things, and kind of refurbishing and remodeling what was already there. And so, for example, Libarna's theater was built in the 1st century. So probably during the reign of the Emperor Claudius, so of Claudius fame. People know that reference? Good. My students don't. Sadly, they don't even know Gladiator anymore. But yes. So the road The latest material we found in the trench was probably 3rd century, and it comes from on top of the road. So the road might have stayed in use later than the actual insula did, the actual buildings itself. And then the sidewalk. So you see this little feature here. We have no idea what this was. When it was first coming up, I thought it might have, like, is that an earlier road? But then, you know, these are clearly the limits of it. And so this has been kind of a little puzzling feature. So that's all I'm gonna probably say about that. We don't know. So ritual. Here's another view of the trench. And this gives you, again, here's the road and the curbstone, the weird feature under the sidewalk. But you can see here that what we've got is a really complex series of remodeling, of building and remodeling that happened during the 1st century and into the 2nd century. Just some really complicated kind of wall building patterns going on that we're still trying to kind of work out what exactly, when exactly they date to. But we have a grasp of kind of the series, the progression from building to remodeling. There's some very kind of peculiar bits of the walls were built at various times. So the road itself was constructed of a variety of different types of stone, mostly limestone cobbles, chipped flat to a rough surface on either side. And some of the road stones seem to have also been reused in some of the wall structures. So at some point, again, not part of the road we excavated, but somewhere they took stones from the road and put them into the walls, which is impressive because Roman roads are built pretty tough. So here you can see kind of the complicated interlocking kind of wall structures we uncovered there. But yeah. So inside the house, we found kind of a number of interesting finds, including this feature, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we all had bets on what was underneath it. So I'll reveal that in a minute. But mostly the material inside the house, again, dated to the 1st half of the 1st century AD to the 2nd century AD. Some interesting pottery finds. We find a lot of South Gallic sigillata, which is a type, if you've seen it before, I should have put a picture, but it's that very red Roman period pottery with a kind of orangey pink layer to it. So it's slipped. It has that red kind of slip on it, which is a clay-based paint essentially. And we found a lot of that, which is interesting because it's coming again from South Gaul, where trade networks seem to be pretty strong, have remained pretty strong between that region and this part of Western Cisalpine Gaul. We found a lot of cookware as well, and a lot of what we call thin-walled ware, which is just ways to describe it. It's extremely thin pottery that's often used for things like drinking cups. That's usually what you find. You also you can find lamps too that are kind of similar in terms of how thin they are. But so interesting pottery coming out. So this is that cool feature. I bet that there was a dolia underneath. Somebody bet a dolia about giant storage jar. Somebody bet that there was an infant in an amphora, because you find those sometimes in Italy. It's a little grim. I'm glad you laughed though. And then what was the other thing? Oh, somebody was hoping it was a drain cover. None of those things. There's absolutely nothing underneath. So we were all disappointed. But it seemed what we did get was almost an entire roof tile that was broken, but kind of placed with the flanges down. And so clearly somebody was trying to make some sort of a flat surface, but what it was used for, we simply don't know. And again, kind of inside the house, we didn't really find anything that felt like a floor. So we kept going down, and didn't really find anything that, again, felt like a floor. So it was a weird structure. But we had some interesting finds come out of the trench. We found 3 liguli, which were like little spatulas that were used either for medicine or for makeup. So we found one that was bronze, one that was iron, and one that was silver. The silver one was huge. I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. Or here, I'll just go forward. So there's the silver one. So, and there's the bronze one, which is tiny. So interesting instruments that kind of, again, kind of could be linked to household things, or could it also be linked to perhaps, again, kind of, they could be associated with some sort of medicine or things like that. We found a mirror fragment. We found some beautiful bone pins like the one you can see up there. A loom weight. We found 2 bronze fibulae, which are basically very fancy safety pins for pinning clothes. We found 2 suspensura. So they were big and round. Usually you see them, they're more often square. Suspensura are used for raised floors so that they can heat them, a lot of times in bathhouses. These were probably, there's no evidence that we found any sort of bath complex anywhere near, or that there was any sort of hypocaust floor. So we do think that they might have been reused for something perhaps, or just found their way over them. We found a coin. So very exciting. I do have a picture of that. Oops. I did not put a picture of that. Sorry. This coin this one was kind of unintelligible. We couldn't see what was on it, which is probably why I didn't put the picture. And then we found glass and iron slag, which again, kind of interesting inside a building that otherwise a lot of these items are household items. So, and glass and iron slag are of course associated with industrial activities like smelting. These were our 2 favorite finds from this. So you can see we've got 2 roof tile fragments, one with a puppy paw print and one with a kitty. So we found one of each. So maybe they played together, probably not because they were from different contexts, but we can imagine. So yeah, so those were the 2 favorite finds of this season. We have very modest finds, you know, where we've got some small trenches. But we were really interested in kind of expanding on what we knew about the structure. So the next year, we opened up trench M3 to see, again, kind of more of the building. And we had some more exciting finds. So you can see here, we had some wonderful GPS people we worked with, who kind of helped us line up the trenches exactly. And we had extended the excavations a little bit to try to see more of this wall. And when we put in our trench M3, we actually we got that bit back in that trench. So again, we had part of the building frontage and the sidewalk and the internal part of the building. We shifted it lower. We didn't need any more road. Right, you're not digging through road. We felt that kind of, as far as kind of our interest in what we wanted to understand more about the site, we didn't need it at that point. So, and you'll notice the big purple squiggly line or curved line was our most exciting find. It was a drain. So there's our trench, again, very pretty, nicely lining up, everything lining up. So you can see the drain here. This is the building frontage and the bit of pavement that we got. So, and if you see, you can see here these roof tiles coming out of the bulk, which again, kind of the trench supervisor was so excited. It was a floor. Or a surface. So a floor made of entirely of roof tiles. So, and they were laid flat, flanges down. We had some complete ones, which made my associate director, who loves roof tiles. So everybody's got their thing, right? And so we got a floor. We got a surface of some sort. And so that made us very happy. And again, kind of, we had complete roof tiles, which aren't easy to come across. And the floor, interestingly, kind of sloped down to the west. So towards the bottom of the picture. And we think that was intentional, that there was kind of an intentional slope to it. But again, that's something we are wondering about. But it did give us our first floor. So underneath the floor, we had a layer that included some really interesting finds. So this is between the floor and the drain and the cover of the drain. We found almost 1 kilogram of iron slag, which is quite a significant amount. Again, attesting to the kind of use of the space perhaps for some sort of industrial activity. We also found massive transport and storage amphora. So there's big storage jars, and they came from all over the place. We found fragments that came from southern Spain. We found fragments that came from the Adriatic Sea region. We had ones that came from the Black Sea region. We had some that came from southern Italy and some that came from France. So all over the place. And it kind of really is a very tangible evidence of the kind of placement of Libarna along this important trade route. And you know, some people have suggested, right, that maybe one of the reasons Libarna didn't have walls was because when it was built, it was just expanding a lot, that there were a lot of people moving in, and they just didn't put walls in. So yeah, so some really fascinating finds coming out of that. We haven't done kind of our pottery illustration yet, so I don't have pretty drawings of the pottery, but they're fragments of amphora. They're not actually, you know, that pretty to look at. So again, kind of here is our drain, which we took some environmental samples of, which we need to process. We did flotation, but you can see it runs under, it pretty much runs under the wall and would have continued under the sidewalk. Weird rubble. Again, we don't know what it's from the pavement. It doesn't seem to have been from the collapse of the building wall. It seems to have come from something else, but we don't know. But inside the drain, we found other interesting things. So we've still got our environmental sample to do, but one really cool thing we found was painted plaster. So there was some red, some yellow, and I think I've covered it up, that was pretty blue in color. So that was some really interesting finds. So back to our trenches, just to reorient ourselves. So that was M2 and M3 that we looked at. So I want you to remember how pretty M2 and M3 looked? Be prepared. So we're going to go down to M1, right? And look where it sits, right? Right on the road, supposedly. That's our trench. And this is it when we first dug it. And it looks pretty ugly. And you'll notice that it has a big gouge in it, right? It's very uneven. This is after the mechanical excavator took off the topsoil. And the reason it looks so ugly is because it was digging down and we were looking for archaeological stuff to come up. Nothing was coming up. Now our GPR results showed that in most places we were able to get GPR results from, the archaeology wasn't far down, like maybe 0.7 meters, really fairly close to the surface. So we started to get nervous. And so we asked the excavator to pull back, which is why we got this really uneven surface. And I need to say that because Elio, who operates the excavator, is a master. So he's so precise, and I feel like he would be unhappy if I represented that as his work. So that was on us. That was on us. So, and you can see in the drawing, and I'll show you in the next picture, but basically no road. So the road should have been right in the middle of it, but no road. In fact, we didn't even really get much wall in it either. So we got this little fragment of wall, and then a really, really badly robbed out wall, which I'll show you a picture in a minute. So this was the first kind of archaeological bits we encountered, which was this giant dump of roof tiles. We got some late antique pottery, like 4th, 5th century, but mostly it was tile and rock. And one of the interesting things was the type of roof tiles we got, which were predominantly what we call tegula. So these are tegula. They're the flat ones with the little flange on them. And then these are what we call imbrices. And so virtually all of this tile dump was made up of these tegula and very little of these kind of rounded bits that would have topped it. So we were thinking that it's probably not a demolition dump, but perhaps it's material introduced somewhere else, you know, surplus tegula or second-hand roofing materials where the imbrices were being reused, were being removed and reused. But yeah, but there is a lot of mortar and stones there. So again, kind of an interesting feature, but again, not pretty. That's our lone bit of wall. That's our lone bit of wall. So nice herringbone, late antique, 4th, 5th century. In fact, where in M2 and M3, we basically had all 1st and 2nd century, a little bit of 3rd. We had nothing really earlier than the 4th century in this trench. This is in the same field. This is like, I can't remember how, like maybe 30 meters away. I can't remember exactly. But these trenches were not that far apart, and they were completely, I mean, it felt like we were digging 2 different sites. So yeah, so this is a herringbone technique, opus spiccatum, that again, was a kind of type of building style used in late antiquity. Interesting stuff in this trench. So in the other 2 trenches, we had all this 1st and 2nd century material, which kind of corresponds a lot with a building period in Libarna that we are well aware of from other excavations and from the other kind of structures that are still standing there. We know very little about Libarna in late antiquity. So this is something that the trench was ugly, the trench was a mess, but really interesting potential in this trench, because we don't know what happened to Libarna in late antiquity. How did the city contract? We know that the latest there was kind of activity at Libarna was 6th century AD. There was a parish church that dated to that. Well, a parish church that's now bits and pieces of somebody's barn, of course, because that's what happens, right? But we don't know much about Libarna at this time. So I was really excited actually by this. So we excavated a small sondage to kind of see kind of a more of the face. But again, like, what happened to this little wall? Like, where's the rest of him? So there he is, kind of in the southern portion of the trench. And then you can see this line of stones running. This was once a wall, but again, kind of in late antiquity, it seems to have been robbed out. So we've got this long robber trench that met up with our sondage here. So in here you can see this is the tile layer that we removed. So, and again, nothing earlier than the 4th century, and we dug down deep. So, I mean, we went down a good couple meters in this corner, just trying to find the earlier material. So there is a slight slope to the hill. So it makes sense that the archaeology was a little bit deeper in retrospect. But we dug down and there was just nothing earlier. So interesting mystery trench. And my poor trench supervisor for this one, this was kind of his first time managing his own trench. And it was just a mess. It was just the stratigraphy was really, really challenging. And where the other trench, it was quite clear what was going on. You know, I mean, kind of everything made sense things were recognizable. Here, kind of, it was a real challenge. We all kind of got there in the morning and kind of looked over the trench and we're kind of just like, what is going on here? So, I mean, we did get some residual pottery in some of the layers, but interestingly, it wasn't 1st century AD, it was 2nd, 1st century BC. So we got residual from essentially, you know, the Iron Age, the end of the Iron Age. So bizarre, but interesting. So for the next year, we went a little bit, oh, sorry, there you can, that's just kind of another example. You can see the robbed out wall here, and then our desperate attempt to find something earlier, to find more archaeological material that just did not materialize. So some interesting finds. So this was a little bronze locking mechanism, deadbolt that we found. We found 2 coins. We found a copper alloy little pendant. So kind of, again, kind of very modest finds. We found a ton of tesserae. So those little stone and glass bits, ours were mostly stone, that make up mosaics, but sadly no mosaic. That's okay. Tesserae are fine, no mosaic. We found some porphyry marble, which was interesting because again, that's quite a fancy stone to find, a very small fragment of it. And again, we found glass and metal slag that kind of attests to, again, the kind of use of, perhaps the use of the space or the dumping of industrial materials there. There's our coin, who my colleague who helped us identify it is here tonight, so hopefully she recognizes that. That is a bronze Antonianus of Claudius II, which dates to the 3rd century. And so that kind of marked probably our earliest material there. That we found. Again, kind of, we didn't even find 3rd century pottery really. So, so that was an interesting find. So, you'll remember we had that little bit of wall and that crappy robbed out wall. Well, let's take a look now at M4, the one we opened up just to the north of it, that long one where we were trying to get the road. So no road, but we got all the walls. Lots of walls, tons of walls. Again, kind of the same Richard who managed trench M1, did trench M4, and again, like he got M1 and he was like, what do I do with this? And then he got M4 and he was like, what do I do with this? So really a really interesting set of, again, structures. We aren't entirely sure. You know, we need to expand again. Probably next year we'll expand this trench to be able to elaborate them a little bit more. But one interesting thing, this was kind of a surprise. This bit of wall here, this came up for debate because we didn't recognize it right away as a wall. It is in fact a particular type of building technique that is very common in rural northern Italy. So one of my colleagues who had done a lot of work up there came and looked at it and, oh yeah, I've seen that before. And we actually were able to find a publication of it. So one of the things working in the region is, again, kind of there hasn't been a whole lot of the Roman archaeology published, certainly not in anything that has left Italy. So there's a book about Libarna that was written in the 90s. It's like the Bible on Libarna. It was written by Silvano Finocchi, who excavated those 2 city blocks in the 70s. And it's there's a couple other kind of edited volumes, again, kind of in Italian on Libarna. But this Bible I was able to get a hold of only because the cousin of the publisher showed up at site. They heard some Americans were working at Libarna, and he showed up with copies in the boot of his car. So that's how we were able to get a hold of it, because there is no other way. The publisher does not apparently exist anymore, and his cousin is the only one who has copies of the book. So it's one of the fun things about working in a region, you know, where you don't get a lot of foreign gigs, which it was sort of like culture shock for me coming up from Pompeii, where, you know, they see an archaeologist and they're like, oh, it's an archaeologist, right? When we moved up here, people were so enthusiastic about the work. They were excited. You know, we work right along the highway, and every day we have people stopping by and interested in our work, including one local historian who visits us almost every day. I think he does, maybe his wife is tired of hearing all about the history of things like Libarna's aqueduct. And so I think he's really excited to have people to talk to about it. So he comes and, you know, he kind of talks at us, right? So, but we adore him. And he's wonderful. He did an entire study of Libarna's water system that has been kind of really helpful and really interesting. That was a tangent. But yeah, so not a lot published that we've had access to, and so we were very fortunate to have somebody there who'd seen this building method used before. So again, kind of my hopeful associate director thought maybe it was a drain cover, but we found another drain, so that's okay that it wasn't, and it was a cool wall. So interesting finds coming out of this trench. So one thing in this little room here, you can see just how small it is. Calling it a room is really probably not appropriate. It's like this little corridor or niche. Like you can kind of stand in it, a person can stand in it sideways. You can see one of our students here, and she would probably just fit in there. We found almost entire pig skeleton in there, which was really cool, along with some cookware. And that was the theme for M4: cooking, food preparation and storage, material culture, food, and particularly pottery. Here you can see we've got one of our students excavating a beautiful bit of amphora, a huge bit of amphora. This was a type that probably came from the Adriatic region of Italy, underneath, again, one of those tegular roof tiles. And again, kind of in nearby M1, we had mostly 4th and 5th century material and that 1 3rd century coin. In this, it was much more like M2 and M3. We had a lot of 1st and 2nd century material with some 3rd century sherds. Large sherds of amphora, and also mortaria. So that's an example from the British Museum, but ours was massive. Ours was we only had a fragment of it, but we had enough of a rim that we could probably figure it was about 50 centimeters across. Massive. So this wasn't the type that, you know, your family kind of uses. It was probably used for food production and preparation on a much wider scale. So mortaria, again, kind of just if you're unfamiliar with the Latin, is a mortar, right? So you use it for grinding materials. It's oftentimes got this little pore in its lip, and it has a very, very rough interior with large inclusions to, again, kind of allow for the grinding of food material. Favorite find from this trench? I don't have a picture of it, and it was only a fragment, but I'm going to show you a reconstruction. This is what we call a glirarium. We had a fragment of a glirarium from the Latin glis, which means dormouse. It was a pot used to fatten dormice. So, because the Romans ate dormice, and we had a fragment of it. So it looked very similar to this, this kind of area of the pot. So again, we haven't gotten to our pot drawing yet. So this is an example from Pompeii, but it was really cool. Really cool. And so this space really kind of was, based on the finds, an area for food storage and preparation. We found African cookware. So again, kind of attesting to Libarna's placement on this trade route and the fact that it had access to goods from all over the empire. We also found a lot of local wares, local cookwares and coursewares, which was interesting. They had their kind of own local imitations, African cookware that they made locally, and that we found there. So there was a mix, a good mix of imported wares and also local wares. So another really interesting thing we found, we had fragments from three different bronze vessels, which is quite cool. So they aren't common finds, but you know, I don't know why there's an R up there. That should be the side that Adobe must have done something with it, but that shouldn't be there. But you can see the kind of you know, what the side profile of the rim sherd looks like. But that was quite a cool find. Those aren't kind of common finds on sites in that region. So that was quite cool. Beautiful example of some glass. We haven't studied the glass yet, but this again probably was second century glass, probably from, we do find a lot of this kind of clear blue glass, probably from again, kind of somebody's fancy jar. This was an item that we debated about. So this is some worked bone, which it could have been a couple things. So it could have been like a little pyxis, a little storage jar for like makeup or something. It could have been a bone hinge. So we find a lot of bone hinges for things like nice boxes. The other thing that we found kind of in our research is that it could have been part of a little cup for shaking gaming dice for part of a game. So that one remains unknown at the moment, but some really interesting options. So one of our kind of favorite finds, again, kind of helped out by Dr. Allison Roy, was a coin of the Emperor Trajan. So an emperor that people generally have heard about. Claudius II, nobody really knows. It's not Claudius, right? So, but Trajan's one's pretty famous. You know, he did a lot of conquering, especially very famously, he conquered the Dacians in what is now Romania. And this coin was minted after his successful conquest. But yeah, really interesting coins. So everybody likes coins. Everybody gets excited when we find a coin. So the students in particular. So there's a lot of interesting things we can say based on our very modest findings from Libarna over these couple excavation seasons. We had in 2023, we had these remarkably different results that were just struggling a bit to kind of figure out how, what is going on in that region of the city. Now, the late antique bit that we found in the southern end, it makes sense that we would find late antique material there. It was very close. That part of the field was actually relatively close to the forum, that center of the city. So it might make sense that as the city contracts, it's going to contract around that political, commercial, religious center. You know, we've got some robbing out of the wall that perhaps, again, attests to, again, the city shrinking a bit and the need to kind of reuse materials. But we also see this interesting period of growth as well in the field. So we've got this kind of nice duality, the shrinking and the contraction of the city, and then the early period of its growth. So hopefully, you know, we can kind of reconcile that. And I think one of the big questions that we have at Libarna at the moment is what happened to the city at the end of its life? Why did this happen? We know in northern Italy in the, the 6th century, right? There was instability, as the big question, why did the Western Roman Empire fall? One of the big things that's blamed is movements of people and that led to political instability, and perhaps that is what is happening. There is some sort of something that's upset the local political and economic structures, and that has caused Libarna to I hate to use the word fall, to decline, like the Roman Empire, the decline and fall of Libarna. Yeah. So we've got these two kind of periods to focus on. But one thing I was left with wondering about is the start of Libarna. I haven't talked much about that, but that was kind of one of my interests. One of the questions that led me to this research is what did Libarna look like in that middle late Republican period? Because that's when it was founded. And most of what we know about Libarna is from the 1st to 2nd century. So what was going on in its early days? And that's something we still don't know, because one thing we did not find was earlier material. Now, we didn't get all the way down to natural, but in our pottery assemblages, we weren't even getting residual material from that period, with the exception of our weird trench M1, where we got some Iron Age, late Iron Age material that was residual. But we simply don't have a good picture of what Libarna looks like in its early phases. And that's something I'm still kind of really interested in trying to understand, is getting this picture of Libarna throughout its life, not just its middle period where it's, at its height, it's getting all this economic and resource influx. What did it look like when it got started? So we do know that there was no previous Ligurian settlement directly beneath Libarna. It was located kind of in the hilltops in the vicinity. But Libarna was founded as a Roman colony on kind of fresh land. So this question of what did it look like when it started is one that's still kind of is still out there and still waiting to be investigated. And that's what I'm really hoping to do in the next couple of seasons, is this kind of and figuring out how to balance this is going to be another thing, right? Because we want the late stuff and we want the early stuff. So where do we put our trenches? So that's kind of a big question. We did get some kind of bits from the 2nd to 3rd century, which again is another period we aren't as familiar with. Really, the 1st to 2nd century is what we know about most for Libarna. So our findings have been kind of weirdly patchy, and some again kind of line up with what we already know, and some of it was totally unexpected. So I think that there's a lot of potential at Libarna still to kind of look at the evolution of a city in this very not well understood region of Italy. And yeah, so that is kind of the main things I kind of wanted to talk about with regards to our project so far. And the plan, again, kind of is to return to this same field and try to continue to elaborate on what we've already found. I'm also hoping to get into that one field where we had really good geophysical survey results and investigate some of that. Because again, kind of the geophys tells us a lot, gives us a lot of information on the structures themselves, but we obviously have to dig to know exactly about the progression of buildings and the stratigraphy and what things actually date to. So I think that those are the kind of two areas that I still want to target. And it's really useful. These are two areas that are gonna, again, kind of help us to understand domestic life at Libarna as well, which is such a kind of rarely understood thing. When you read about domestic life, you hear about Pompeii and Herculaneum, right? And some other sites you get kind of elaboration on the houses, places like Cosa, which was another Roman colony in central Italy. And just kind of in a lot of Roman archaeology, the city the focus in cities tends to be on public architecture, and so the study of houses could be really interesting at Libarna. And as far as the kind of region goes, there's only a single study that's ever been done of houses in northern Italy, and that basically just looked at the structure as was, didn't look at things like the evolution. And so how did houses change in northern Italy? And again, kind of, can we see any influence in what looks like a very Roman city? I mean, Libarna on the surface looks very, very Roman. And so there's really so much potential for an investigation of the material culture and the finds, as well as the pottery, to understand elements of domestic life, and perhaps kind of elements where maybe we can see some survival of social and kind of social and cultural elements of the local communities that really seem to, in the existing landscape of the city, to have disappeared, right? Libarna just, it looks so Roman, but we know that there were other people, there were peoples that were not Roman that were living there. So, so at the end of that ramble, that's kind of the main things that I wanted to kind of cover, but I would like to thank some various important people who've worked very closely with us. The superintendent of, again, Piedmonte, since we are technically in Piedmonte. Our controller, Simone Lerma, who's the one who sometimes points and says, dig there, and we do, because we're trying to be, because we want to keep them happy. And yes, so those are just people. We've had phenomenal students come out. Again, we run it as a field school as well. So we take students out every year. We're a small team, though, as you can tell from the size of our trenches. We go slow and steady. One of the lessons I learned from Pompeii, the project I worked on, was they excavated for 14 years an entire city block in Pompeii. That was how we ended up so backlogged and with so much stuff. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is keep things small and controllable. So slow and steady wins the race. And slow and steady will eventually reveal to us important things about Libarna and help us contribute a better understanding of different parts of Roman Italy that aren't often incorporated into the narratives we get that so focus on central and southern Italian sites. So that's what I wanted to tell you all about today. So thank you all for listening.
Time for some Q&A if folks have some questions.
Yeah.
Two questions. First, local dialect in antiquity, Celtic or Italic?
So the Ligurian dialect is not Italic. It is, I believe, closer. It's a kind of, it's, they're called Celto-Ligurians, and I think that that stems a lot from, that stems a lot from kind of the similarities. Again, though that they are very distinct. So it's not, but generally it's not an Italic dialect.
The second question, might we be looking at a kind of sophisticated pit stop on a Roman highway?
I think that's absolutely possible. So yes, because our knowledge of Libarna is very fragmentary. And actually, can I go back on the slides? Oh,
sorry, I just put the chat up
that's
for you
okay.
there. There you go.
Okay, I got to go back ways. But it's an excellent question. So I want to get back to the map of Libarna. So, yeah, I mean, it is possible that Libarna maybe wasn't always as big as we like to assume. So the area by the south gate, they did some excavations when they built a chocolate factory there. So more modern development. Not an unwelcome one. There's a factory store. But you can kind of see the factories kind of down here, but they did a bunch of test pits and they actually got no archaeology down there. And that's down by the south gate. And so it raises an interesting question of what was going on down there exactly? Because we would expect to find structures there. We would expect to find some archaeological materials, and they found almost nothing. So very curious. We've got a monumental gate down there, but no structures. And I mean, it's possible that the archaeology was all maybe destroyed over the course of time. One of the things we think happened with M1 was that that in the 19th century, to clear the field to be used, that maybe that might have disrupted some of the archaeology too. But I mean, like, the archaeology survives so well in most places that we've seen. Like, we actually did GPR under one of the parking lots for the archaeological site, and the archaeology was still clear in the GPR. So the fact that we find nothing down there makes us question it. Was Libarna as big as we've previously thought? So that is possible. And while the Via Postumia was a major trade route for a while, it was eventually replaced. And so Libarna was no longer along the most kind of populated trade route in northern Italy. So, you know, that's an interesting question that we are certainly kind of thinking about in terms of rewriting what we understand about Libarna. So.
When you showed the pottery,
Mhm.
you said something about they used it to fatten up the mice
Dormice, yes.
to eat.
Yep, they ate dormice. So, yep, they ate dormice. Very famously, the Romans had recipes for dormice, and dormice are actually quite big. They're not like little field mice that we think about. Dormice get quite big, and yeah, so they had these kind of circuits in the inside that the mice could kind of run around and live.
And
Yeah.
second question
Mhm.
on the coins.
Mhm.
What were they made of, and how do you tell which emperor was which? I mean, they all, you know, there's no writing or dating. So how do you discover that?
So there is some writing on it. You get legends on the coins for example, on the coin of Trajan, we have his various names. And so we're able to date that, not just because we have the name of the emperor, but as they did things, they would get additional names added to them. So like DAC, we find on coins of Trajan after his campaign in Dacia. And so we can date, because we know the date of that campaign, we know the coin must have come after it. And so that allows us to date it. And then certain features of the, you know, certain emperors are recognizable. And I'm going to actually quote Dr. Roy, who is a coin specialist and told me about this, is that Trajan apparently has a very, narrow face. And so he's very recognizable. And a bowl haircut, There we go. I forgot where the coin was for the Antonianus. Where are you, coin? Sorry, I'm going all over the place. And so on him, that radiate crown dates him as what, this 3rd century? So things like that. There are visuals that give it away. So coins are very useful for dating things. So pottery is more common, and pottery can tell us a lot, and coins can give us very, very specific dates sometimes. So, so we think this one looks bronze, and the Trajan one was bronze as well. So you can kind of visually tell the material sometimes, and sometimes you can go by the weight too, right? And the image, yeah. So, indeed. So yeah.
in that kind of region in general,
Mhm.
like, are there cities that continue to the modern day? And like, what's usually the kind of comparison between the Roman cities, maybe in the north that like
Mhm.
ended up in a farm field, and the ones that like I know Turin
Mhm.
there's Roman ruins there, like, how's that all connected? Like, is it common for them to just have kind of disappeared, or is the opposite more common?
It varies. It can vary. Yes, some towns maintained their importance, like Turin, like Milan, ancient Mediolanum. And then other sites, there's one called Industria, that has a temple to Isis in it, and then Libarna, some just stayed out of use. And again, kind of that's a question. And one of the things that I really want to do is kind of look at the kind of late antique landscape in the region and look at how towns contracted, which ones contracted, and which ones survived and maintained, and maintained populations. So Libarna, again, kind of 6th century, it seems to end, and then you get some medieval ruins to the south and to the north. So, but those are quite a bit later, like 11th, 12th century. So again, kind of we don't really understand why Libarna faded and why Turin lasted. Interestingly, Turin was also had a pre-Roman settlement of the Taurini, were the group there. So it's a good question. I wish I had a better answer, but it's kind of the late antique landscape is one that really needs kind of some more investigation in the region. So, yeah.
Thanks. We have that area where you said, and I don't know whether
Mhm.
on geography,
Mhm.
one area where you thought something should be there by the south gate, maybe,
Mhm.
nothing's there.
Yeah.
And then you have the one area that you call the messy site.
Mhm.
It looks like there's a lot of errors, and that could have been like some kind of natural disaster, like a big little flood or over a river that went through in that area that wiped parts of it out.
That's a good question. Let me go back to the map. Which I was sure I had a bet. Let me go back to my survey map because I think that one has some better detail than the excavation map. So you get the River Scrivia down here. There's kind of a plateau and then it drops and the river's there. And we do know that it was prone to some flooding during the rainy seasons. We aren't 100% sure like how steadily it flowed during antiquity. And one of the things I want to do is do some kind of boreholes kind of along the kind of edges and see like if we can look at the course that the river might have taken in antiquity. But at least kind of this is our area of excavation and it's quite far from the river. So I think probably the robbing out of the wall and the destruction of the wall was just intentional human activity. So, and not a stupid question at all. And then the gate would be down here. So that's where the kind of this is the field they did some of the work in where they found absolutely nothing. So.
Chat questions here.
Oh yeah, we did have a chat question, didn't we?
Looks like we have 2 of them.
Okay.
So we have 2 chat questions, and then
Mhm.
it'll be good guests of our host museum, so we'll probably kind of close off for the evening after this. So.
Okay, so the question is, do you anticipate there will be Roman style graves along the road outside of the city? Where were the city gates? So the city gates were located again, kind of, I'm gonna just close the chat so I can what was it, Control L to get the little laser pointer?
If you hold the Control L.
I ruined it. Okay, so the south gate was down here and was discovered during the excavations of a chocolate factory. The north gate is located up here, actually right about here, underneath what is now an electrical plant. And in fact, the North Gate's really interesting because where it lies, if there had been walls, the walls would have run right through the theater. So again, kind of the theater is kind of on the very outskirts of the city, as is the amphitheater, because you don't want those rowdy sports fans to disrupt things in the center. So would we anticipate finding Roman graves? So interestingly, kind of in this area just to the north of the theater, they found Lombard, so post-Roman graves. And then they found some pre-Roman graves in the vicinity, but they haven't really found Roman graves. So it's an excellent question, but one we don't have the answer to at the moment. We would expect to find Roman graves, right? Because they did bury their dead outside their walls, as we know from a lot of Roman cities. But we haven't found Roman graves outside of Libarna yet. So. All right, how do I get back to the, I'm so sorry, I'm so bad with technology.
No, aren't we all? There we are.
So clearly Libarna is a strategically developed Roman city following the war, bringing control of the region. Conceptually, how are you approaching finding more about Ligurian culture and how it was impacted by Roman expansion? What is known about Ligurian settlements and culture near Libarna? So, okay, excellent question. How are we going about finding evidence of Ligurian culture? And that's sort of one of those things that's hard to know, right? You kind of dig and you find what you find. And, I think one of the things is to, again, kind of try to identify areas of the city where we can see that early transition. And also, looking at things like locally produced items, what sorts of things they were producing locally. We can see things like local pottery, and we can see just like we got some of the residual pottery from the Iron Age in some of our trenches. Again, it was residual rather than kind of in a layer associated with that period in time. So it's about, I think, the questions we ask of the material culture, which again, I think it's dodging the question maybe a little bit. But I think trying to look at what makes Libarna distinctive in the region, within the context of the region, and to what we understand. We do know quite a bit about Ligurian culture. There's been some important archaeological work done. Some of it is predominantly been done on burials. And we do have some evidence of settlements and things like housing. So we do have a grasp of the material culture of the Ligurians. So we can look for those things and try to, I think we can look for the ways that they meld with Roman culture. And it's about, again, coming back to the way that Libarna is unique in its cultural setting and what makes it different from other Roman towns. So it's an ongoing process because it is a little bit, it can be a little difficult to see some of that stuff in what looks very Roman. I mean, the Romans really, they moved into places, they left their shit everywhere, and they, there's a reason why for years and years and decades we talked about Romanization, right? This idea that the Romans just came and suddenly everybody became Roman, which we now know is not true. But we look for things like the continual use of certain types of material culture, things being used in culturally specific ways. So things like that. And a lot of that will come out of the study of some of the material culture that we're doing, which will be part of the post-excavation work. So I don't have a lot of answers right now, but I hope that when we're able to get in to studying some of the finds that we found, and in their archaeological context, we'll be able to say perhaps more about that. But We might not, everything might just look Roman, because sometimes it does.
Okay, so now's the time of the night.
Oops.
Before we thank our speaker, let's give her another round of applause. Please get out your tickets. We